Welcome to She Moves Bravely, a podcast dedicated to empowering women through stories of resilience, courage, and success. I'm your host, Shantae Dent. Today is more than an honor. I'm going to introduce you to a woman who I met in 2007. This is when I decided to volunteer at a rape crisis center and become a certified California state rape crisis counselor. And this woman, this powerful woman, served as the big sister during my training cohort. And I am beyond thankful that I was able to meet her that night. And from 2007 to this day, we've remained good friends with a love for one another. I'm grateful. I'm so grateful for everything she's going to share with you all today. She is the director of sexual assault evidence outreach for California State Office of the Attorney General. Dr. Sarai S. Crain. Welcome to the show, Sarai.
Thank you. And good morning. I'm happy I guess it's afternoon for you. I'm in California, so it's good morning for me still. I just want to start off by saying how much I love you, how proud I am of you, and honored to be a guest here in this platform. I appreciate how you have allowed the redemptive power of God to govern your story, because you have a story and you have a really difficult story, but you never allowed your story to be the end of your story. And I think, in accordance with the word that says they overcame by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony, I celebrate the fact that you have been willing to share your testimony and your story, because it heals people. And so I'm grateful to have been part of the journey and part of how God was moving and shaping you, Shantae. So blessings to you and good morning. To everyone else out there, my name is Sarai, and people call me a lot of different things. They call me Sarai, they call me Pastor, they call me Dr. Crain, they call me all kinds of things. But I'm the most humbled to be called a child of God, sister, and friend. So I'll start by saying, for the sake of this podcast, and particularly the occasion being, Sexual Assault Awareness Month, I feel like I've spent the last, 20 years since I got certified as a sexual assault counselor through the state of California, trying to bring to the forefront that this is a legitimate issue and wanting to have a seat at the table. At the time that I became certified, I was actually working as a site director at a middle school. I was super broke in graduate school, working on my master's, and needed a job. And one of my colleagues who was allowing me to do some programming in her classroom was headed off to get training. She was involved in the training to become a sexual assault counselor as well through Bay Area Women Against Rape, BAWAR, which is the oldest rape crisis agency in the nation, founded in Berkeley in 1972. And now is operational out of Oakland. But I was just being nosy. She said she was doing this training and I'm like, well, what's the training? And so she told me about it. I said, well, I want to do it. And, really was just being nosy. And that decision to join that training has changed my life. Like it has literally changed my life. And I'm so grateful. That decision to join that training changed my life. It changed the entire trajectory of my career and ministry. At the time, I was serving as a minister in training at my first church. That was the church that I was licensed in. I actually was ordained in that church. And probably about 3 or 4 months before ordination is when I completed my certification to be a sexual assault counselor. And when you become a sexual assault counselor in the state of California, it authorizes you to staff the crisis line that individuals can call in for crisis support, counseling support, and support with identifying resources for their particular trauma. It also authorizes you to be a first responder in the local emergency department where victims would be transported to obtain a forensic exam. So when an individual is raped, sexually assaulted, beaten, and or identified as a victim of sexual assault, domestic violence, and or human trafficking or exploitation, they have the legal right to have an advocate present with them when they provide either their forensic interview to law enforcement or when they're obtaining a forensic examination, which we, call a rape kit. And so they have the legal right. And so there has to be, certified, trained individuals that can respond to those particular types of harm. And when I was called out to my first sexual assault exam, the first victim in the local emergency department where I was responding to was a member of my church. And this is someone who I knew, who someone I loved, someone who I saw, at least twice a week, had been assaulted. It really, it shook me that she was this individual because I'm like, wait, I know you. What are you talking about? But beyond the shock of her experience of being sexually assaulted, she had actually been assaulted by an intruder in her home who broke through her front door, sexually assaulted her, and then she had been transported to the emergency department. But beyond that, I was astounded, offended, and deeply impacted by how under equipped and ill equipped the clergy at our church were. The pastor at the time was angry and deeply offended that I did not breach confidentiality and disclose what had happened to this young woman. And so it made it very clear to me that the church and that clergy and lay leaders were grossly under-equipped and ill-equipped to address survivors of sexual assault. And beyond that, not only were they ill-equipped or under-equipped, they were causing harm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that their lack of, intelligence emotionally and spiritually about the issue was causing more injury to individuals that had experienced it, either by bad theology, very irresponsible teaching, extraordinarily ill, informed ideas or notions of big themes like forgiveness, themes like, healing per se. So it just triggered something in me. And so I feel like it became my mission to educate the church and to be a safe place for the church. Shantae, as you know, the Black church in particular is a hub for all type of social supports, right? So we as clergy end up being the individuals that do marriage counseling, couples counseling, individual trauma counseling, financial counseling. So we become those individuals that people will go to. And oftentimes we're the ones that have to give them permission to seek out other mental health supports. And a barrier for a lot of people in terms of mental health or, other types of crisis or trauma supportive services, money or finances becomes a burden or a barrier. So a lot of times they'll seek out clergy because they think, they're free. This is a member of the church, so they're going to go for free. But if the individuals who are in leadership are ill-equipped or under-equipped to handle that level of response, then they can usually end up causing more harm. It's usually not an ignorance is bliss situation when it comes to it. So I didn't end up staying at that church very long, but I had been there for a total of 8 years by the time I ended up leaving. And not long after that happened with that victim, I too had been victimized by an individual who raped and nearly kidnapped me. And again, horrified by the ways that I was treated by the people in leadership and the people who loved me, who said that they loved me, who I had been doing life with. I'll never forget when I showed up to the emergency department to receive my own forensic exam. The social worker, actually the triage nurse, was just kind of like, "Oh, hey, Sarai, where's your client?" Because I had just been there, with a client. Mm-hmm. So my life had been really impacted by sexual assault as an advocate, but also as a survivor as well. So I did take some time, off from the crisis line and off from my own response as I was dealing with my own PTSD, rape trauma syndrome, and all the things that came along with my own experience. The individual was charged, we had to go to trial. He fled the country. I mean, it was a very dramatic experience that I had myself. And quite frankly, I feel like some of the ways that I was treated well within the system, the whole ecosystem, being the examiners and law enforcement and the prosecutor's office. A lot of that had to do with the fact that I was, this champion and leader and advocate. And so I remember the former executive director, I know you remember Marsha Blackstock, may she rest in peace, telling law enforcement, like, she's one of us and you guys have to take care of her well. Mm-hmm. And so that too sparked this outrage around, like, oh, this could even happen to one of us, one of the strong ones, one of the smart girls, one of the this. And so I was confronted personally with very harmful and erroneous beliefs about sexual assault that caused a lot of harm. And so, by the time I, endeavored to really look at sexual assault academically and from a scholastic standpoint, I had both types of experiences where I had survived it while also being a support person, and now also really looking at it from a more clinical lens and orientation. So I ended up, I knew at some point that, after my master's, that I would end up, engaging in doctoral studies, primarily because I really just wanted to do the work and the research. I wanted to be able to teach. I wanted to be able to lead in a way that was really going to be about advocating, and not just advocating, but like shifting the culture around how we address sexual assault and gender-based violence in all of its forms. So when I enrolled in my doctoral program, I really wanted to make sure that I was engaged in a program where I could integrate both theological studies as well as, clinical studies, to create more of an integration of the two disciplines in academia. So my work was really around, I did research on, sexual violence in the Hebrew Bible, and did a comparative analysis of that and sexual violence in the United States. And so I started teaching about it. And, honestly, Shantae, I started off with the goal of developing a curriculum for training pastors and equipping pastors on how to respond to survivors within the context of their churches. But, pastors don't really like hearing what they don't know, and they don't like hearing what they don't do well. And so I couldn't get critical mass. And so I decided, I can't focus on, these pastors. I've got to focus on survivors and victims themselves. How do I create trauma-informed, spiritually responsible methods of responding to individuals whereby they are not harmed and or injured by the church, especially individuals that had actually been victimized by clergy, because that's a thing too.
Yeah.
I am not a member of the Catholic Church, and I feel like Protestants like myself have made sport of taking shots at folks in the Catholic Church, as if we have done better or a better job of serving victims and survivors, when the reality is we have caused more harm in a lot of ways, or similar harms as we've seen publicized within the Catholic Church. I just think, we don't say nothing, and we hide and protect, especially Black folks. We hide and protect the individuals that cause harm in our communities. But that's a different podcast. Yeah. So we'll have that conversation at another time. So with, my doctoral studies, I remember the day that I submitted my dissertation. It was a very painful process. And I'm carrying in 3 copies of a 200-page document. So it's very heavy. And so I'm holding it, my neck hurts, my back hurts. I got carpal tunnel. I've been writing on this thing. And I'm telling you research sexual assault long enough, it can be painful.
Yeah, it'll wear on you.
Oh my gosh. So when I go to actually submit, the document, I remember praying a very brief prayer. And I said, Lord, please let this be a seed for the kingdom. It wasn't some long, elaborate prayer. I didn't lay hands on it, pour oil on it, speak in tongues. It wasn't that serious. I just said, Lord, let this be a seed for the kingdom. So I graduated in May, and then I'm offered the position to take over as the executive director of BAWAR, making me the first executive of color in 45 years of the agency's history. And so God is enlarging my territory. Now, no longer am I just running groups within the context of my church. And let me say, when I started running groups within the context of the church, I hit critical mass every time. I never had enough space in my groups because I would always have, survivors that were signing up for my groups. And so eventually, in the context of the church where I was serving, I had to figure out a way to duplicate myself and other volunteers because I needed help. I couldn't, run all these groups. And to this day, every time I've spoken about sexual assault, either at a conference or in a sermon or in any kind of context, in a faith-based kind of narrative, 100% of the time I get a disclosure. And that's from men, women, and individuals that don't identify as either way. I get disclosures all the time. When people ask me, I've had disclosures on flights. I'm at the airport. I'll never forget a woman. We were on the shuttle headed back to the long-term parking garage. And she asked me, oh, what do you do? And I told her what I did. And she immediately burst in tears, started weeping on the bus. And now here's an opportunity for me to not just share Christ, but to share resources for healing. So the point that I'm making is that I've always stayed busy with my work because there's always work to do. And then also I started leading and training in police academies and working with law enforcement because I'm like, listen, if you're going to be conducting interviews, then you need to be equipped to know what's going on with an individual that has been recently traumatized as you're trying to obtain, evidence, or you're trying to get information for it to be turned over for charging with the district attorney's office. And here's why you might get spotty stories. You might get inconsistent stories. You might get different stories than you get the first night than you would get 2 weeks later. This is an individual who's in trauma brain. So in addition, like I said, to the stuff that I've been doing in the church, now this is being appropriated within the context of the ecosystem of individuals that are responding to survivors of sexual assault. So I would say, upon, being appointed executive director, now I'm in an institution that's, very white. I give a lot of credence to, the white feminism that came out of the 1970s, and it had its limitations on how to work with survivors of color. And so now we're dealing with, all types of issues and ills with outreach. And I knew that in working with Black and brown folks and Indigenous folks, that we needed to do outreach in faith communities, because oftentimes that's who, individuals are reaching out to for supports. So that led to me being, appointed the City of Oakland's first deputy chief of gender-based violence, where my responsibility was to do the strategic implementation of preventative and intervention strategies of gender-based violence of multiple types. So that's sexual assault, domestic violence, and sexual exploitation, which I want to name that those find themselves at the intersections of each other. I would say from a funding perspective, they are otherized, right? So we have a domestic violence agency and a sexual assault agency and a sexual exploitation agency, or people that work with trafficking. But the reality is you'll find the same victims in all of them. Mm-hmm. Okay. And oftentimes people that are being sexually trafficked or exploited, it's happened at the hands of an intimate partner who has raped them into submission, right? So there's all these, these spaces of interconnectedness that you find with these folks. So I have my hands full, with that. And during that, time after leaving there and experiencing gender-based violence at the hands of the chief of that department, but that's a whole other podcast, I end up in the Attorney General's office. And so that little prayer that I prayed, exhausted, tired, drained from writing that dissertation and submitting it, has just been manifest in so many ways. And I know that God's not even done with me yet. That now I'm working on policy and legislation. Now I'm working on protocols that will serve the state of California and serve as a model nationally for how to address it. To my knowledge, there's only one other individual that has a position even similar to mine, and that's in the state of Texas. So I feel deeply humbled and honored that I chose to allow God to redeem my own trauma and harm. I am still deeply moved by my own trauma and harm. I am still deeply anchored by my own trauma and harm. And yet I am compelled to keep going because I have seen what happens when people get support, when they get help. And it can heal individuals, which can heal relationships, which can heal families, which can heal communities. And so that's why I do what I do. The work is difficult, and you will get your heart broken time and time again, not just from the horror stories, but from the individuals that just dropped the people that have been hurt and harmed. So I feel like I've been talking a lot. Feel free to jump in, ask questions, get clarity. And yeah, we can keep on.
Right. I intentionally wanted you to elaborate, and it's been So informative on many levels. And I am thankful for your transparency, because what we find in this arena of sexual violation and sexual trauma, the majority of victims remain silent because of the myths, the lies, the misunderstandings, the judgment, the shame, and it's heartbreaking. We see it often. It's heartbreaking because they don't get that opportunity
Right.
to recover. They're still stuck at day one because no one is normalizing this aftermath. I know both of us as believers and followers of Christ, we would not ever say anything to shed bad light on church, and we also have to be honest
We got to be
about
honest.
what happens.
Yes.
I, raise both of my hands, and I can attest to what you were sharing about whether it's clergy, church members, family, or friends, ill-equipped, causing more hurt and harm, not gearing us in this direction toward healing, but there's just more layers of hurt. And I
Yes.
want to pause and just say to our listeners, if that is you, oh, our heart breaks and we are sorry you had to have that type of experience or those conversations that caused you additional harm. And we also urge you not to throw in the towel. If that first person or that first clergy member didn't listen and honor your story and support you, please don't stop there.
That's right.
And we're going to share information and include it in the show notes as well. The RAIN hotline, where you can make a connection with individuals who are ready, willing, and fully equipped to support you.
Yeah.
Sarai, you definitely are carrying this mantle, starting in this industry where you were servicing the victims and survivors, and then the traumatic experience that you had, which led you to an even deeper commitment for the cause. You're unstoppable. I just need to say that. You are unstoppable, and I thank you for the work that you are doing. For anyone who is still in that place and they don't know what to do or how to do it, I want to take that next step, but there's the but, and they feel paralyzed. What would you say to that individual?
I would say, I mean, not to sound cliche, but I would say just do it.
Yeah.
You will be doing yourself, your family, your children, your generations to come a huge life-changing favor by just saying yes. And I often tell people that you have to sometimes deal with the pus before you're able to deal with the smooth skin.
Mm-hmm.
And that just means it will oftentimes hurt before it gets better, but you're letting the pus out, you're getting the infection out, and you're cleaning it out. So if I have a wound and there's an injury there, it goes unaddressed. And then sometimes, it can create it can get infected. And sometimes it'll create some pus. Sometimes, you gotta, if you don't address it quick enough, now you gotta go to the hospital and let them scrape it out. Sometimes you can do wound care at home, but oftentimes you're gonna need a professional to help you. And when it comes to sexual assault and sexual violence, time does not heal that wound. It does not.
No.
Intervention heals wounds. Applying a salve, a balm, some type of medicine is what's going to heal the wound. And, we need, just from a general perspective of trauma healing, I learned this, when I was in college getting my bachelor's, that, for community violence, types of violences that are caused, by people that we know, because most sexual assault, 84% is, someone you know. You need social support. But the three typical ways that people heal are distancing, avoiding, or social support. Seeking social support is always going to be the hardest one. Distancing typically has to do with like the physical proximity or the behaviors that we engage in to distance ourselves from that particular stimulus. So, for example, if you were sexually assaulted by a family member, you're not going to Thanksgiving. You're not, you know, gonna, if they lived in a particular neighborhood, okay, we're not going to go to that neighborhood. That's the distancing, right? The escaping is where you employ something to try to reduce the stimulus. So now you're drinking, smoking, shopping, having sex. I find with sexual assault victims, you either end on one side of a polarity of being hyposexual, meaning you're very shut down. That would have been me. It was easier to do that because I was a Christian, I was a believer, you know, so I'm just keeping my body holy for Christ, when in reality, I was completely sexually traumatized. Or you lean on the hypersexual. So now you're using, you know, sex and sex and sex to try to escape, you know, the experience of being activated around that particular trauma or assault. So when you find yourself identifying some of these behaviors, typically that happens outside of the safety of seeking social support. And yeah, you can have your good girlfriends and family members who are very important healing, sanative resources in our lives. But we typically need someone who is trained, particularly in these areas of sexual assault and or gender-based violence, to heal. And you and I both know people of faith, people of indigenous backgrounds, we heal in circle. You know, it's Western and white to think that we're just going to do it by ourselves and we can just read a self-help book by ourselves. I don't care how introverted you are. We need each other to heal.
Yeah.
And so sometimes
Yeah.
that's why support groups are so powerful. That's why the AA movement has been effective for over 100 years, because it's people sitting in circle talking through normalizing and regularizing their experience of harm. And let me just say, since I'm there, that when I was doing my research, and I started interviewing, you know, people that worked with addiction intervention. And one of my colleagues, who a man of God as well, who's been an addiction interventionist for the last 30 years, he said at least 85% of his female identified clients were survivors of sexual assault, and at least 50% of his male identified clients were survivors of sexual assault. It's just that they did not, he knew that the men didn't disclose at the same level of the women.
Mm.
But that he could essentially, he said that it got to the point where he realized that if he had a female client that came to sit across from him that was you know, enduring AA, like so an alcohol addiction or a substance use addiction, that he just had to assume that they were sexual assault survivors until they said otherwise.
My goodness.
But that's how common and regular it is. So there's so many social ills that we're dealing with on a regular basis. And let's talk about gun violence. We think that people who are out here shooting and that it's group and gang violence, that somehow that's different than individuals that have been experienced or have experienced and or exposed to other types of harm. Yeah. Watching domestic violence as a child is the single greatest predictor that an individual will cause sexual violence or harm in their adult life. It is the single greatest predictor. So, you know, you can, you know, I'm citing the ACEs study, which is the Adverse Childhood Experiences study that was published by Kaiser Permanente. But it's like, you know, you think somebody who's out there shooting, you know, people as a way of managing conflict, that somehow that they're going to go home and be, you know, trauma informed with dealing with their wives or girlfriends. Like, give me a break. And many of them were experiencing sexual harm and or assault. And that's why they're dealing with their anger in this way. Yeah. So I can't tell you how many, you know, people that have had it all together. You know, you start talking. I did a lot of couples counseling when I was doing my doctorate. I meet with them. We might meet for a month, 2 months, and eventually somebody was going to disclose that they experienced sexual, you know, sexual assault or violence when they were children. Yeah. So to answer your question, Shantae, I would tell that person, you have to get help, because it is showing up in ways that you think you're avoiding and that you're not conscious of, but it is manifesting itself in the ways you eat, the way you talk, the way you pray, the way you relate to God, the way that you are showing up for your children, all that anxiety. You don't let them go spend the night at people's houses because you claim you're being protective. That is trauma that is showing up that has not been dealt with and or addressed.
Whew. Sarai.
Hello.
You are nailing it. And this is a message that I want us to shout to the mountaintops. You know, this is so common, and it's heartbreaking as well, because there are so many levels of violence that we see today. And we know, okay, yeah, we're not claiming 100% of the individuals who, partake in mass shooting or victims of sexual violence. We're not claiming 100%, but what we will tell you is that many individuals who are causing harm and crime toward others have that in their background, some form of sexual trauma and sexual violence. I also like that you brought it in, took it home for that mom, for that dad, for those married couples, individuals in relationships. And this is one area that I believe drove me and gave me the fuel to keep on this journey of healing and restoration. I knew that if I'm not right, my marriage won't be healthy.
That's right. That's
I
right.
will not be a healthy mom. Like, Sarai, that scared me. Like, that literally scared me and caused me to lock in on fighting for my emotional health and my emotional freedom. Like, it was a non-negotiable. As long as I am living, I need to make sure I enjoy this life that I live. And unless you live somewhere in a forest, in a cave, you will interact with individuals. And if you don't, you might not want to admit this, but the truth is, when you're not able to sustain a job, maintain healthy relationships, and you're also assuming it's someone else, the truth is there's something going on. And here's the reality, listeners. As we mentioned, when we talk about statistics, we are not claiming that everyone who has some type of problem or issue, again, is this victim of sexual trauma.
Right. Exactly.
But what we are doing is urging you to be honest with yourself.
Right.
And get the help that you need.
Right.
I have a term that I use often: denial leads to destruction. And there are various levels and forms of destruction, but if you take a moment, self-aware introspection, and be honest with yourself, can you say that, oh no, it hasn't affected me, or it's not hindering me? It is. If you haven't began this journey of healing and recovery, it is. Sarai, you said it, time does not heal. So you can be an adult with a family or a single adult, and it might, your sexual violence might have occurred during your childhood, and you figure, oh, that was 30, 40, 50 years ago. I'm good. No, you're not. You suppressed, you've covered it up. You're wearing a mask, but good, free? No.
That's right. And I feel like it, with the wound analogy, time won't heal the wound. Time and intervention heals the wound. But in some cases, if the wound goes unchecked, it's not going to heal. It's going to turn gangrenous.
And that's painful.
Yeah. And in some cases, depending on the location of it, an individual has that, then they have to amputate that part of their body.
Yeah.
To be cut out and removed. But that's because death has shown up. And so for many people, they've torn up all their relationships. They've torn up marriages. They've torn up, all kind of good things in their lives. Friendships. See, we like to talk about the intimate, relationships, but what about those friendships that got torn up? Behind, the church memberships. You done gone to 7 different churches, because they not feeding you. Okay.
Something else is going on.
Something else is going on. Or we attract other harmful individuals that mimic the individuals that caused the original harm in the first place. So there's a lot of ways that we have individuals not being kind to ourselves. And I hold the church responsible, clergy in particular, for them not doing their own work. So you preaching and hollering, and that's how you thought you were going to heal. But you as the cleric didn't do your own work. And so you're not giving your individuals the people that you have influence over, you're not giving them permission to do their work. We're not talking about that. And like you said, we don't want to talk about what the church isn't doing. Well, I do. And so for some people, It's made me really popular. For some people, they're like, we're not ever having her back here again. She charged too much mess.
But say it anyway, Sarai. Say it anyway.
Exactly. Exactly.
Oh, Sarai, thank you for sharing so much wisdom and dropping golden nuggets. I am confident that there is a listener, and today is their wake-up call. Again,
Amen.
we will have contact information in our show notes. For now, rain.org, RAINN.org is a resource that can connect you with local rape crisis counselors. And you talked about healing in circles, and I'm all about, you don't have to put all your eggs in one basket. If you do have that friend who can be with you in the trenches and not judge your story or your situation, wherever you can find a safe space mentally, physically, and emotionally, make that connection and begin this journey so that you can change the trajectory of your future and you can become that powerful, purposeful, and productive individual that you were created to be.
Amen.
You can make that change, but it starts with you making a choice, making a decision. I'm hopeful and I'm optimistic that you will make that decision.
Amen.
Sarai, I'm going to pass the baton to you and allow you to close us out, share your heart, and if there's any way that individuals can connect with you, support what you're doing, let us know.
All right. Thank you. Well, first and foremost, if there's a listener here that may be feeling activated and or triggered by the things that I've said, I would encourage you to lean into that activation. Common word is trigger. So if you felt triggered and or activated by the things that I've said, my guess is that that is your soul inviting you to address what has not been addressed. For those of you who have actually addressed your trauma, it may be an invitation to lean into a bit more support. Not to pathologize you being impacted, but it's possible that maybe God is calling you to be a healer and to be an advocate and a sojourner for other individuals. My hope and goal is to see people whole. And it is my honor and privilege to be a servant leader in this work and a liberator in the work. You are not what you've been through. What you've been through is what you've been through. And you are more than a conqueror. God is yet able and well able to touch you at the point of your need. And so is a therapist and or a support group. So I want to encourage you in that way. I work for the government now, so I'm all public. If you want to have access to me, but I can be found on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. I'm Sarai, Sarai. Again, some people, I think on LinkedIn is Dr. Sarai Crain. Maybe I don't know that the prefix is on Facebook or Instagram, but yeah, I'm happy to connect with whomever. And I also am going to be facilitating a support group for survivors of sexual assault through a ministry called Mentoring You. And that will be launching within the next, 30 to 45 days. So stay tuned, check in, and feel free to reach out. Maybe you might want to be engaged in that. I do want to say that it is worth the investment to get to help and support. So don't always look for free stuff. Be willing to invest in yourself like you invest in them shoes. Hello, somebody.
Absolutely. Say it again.
God bless you. Happy April. And God bless you, Shantae, for continuing to give people permission to heal. I love you. I'm proud of you. And I'm praying for all of the listeners who may have been impacted by this today. God bless.
Thank you, Sarai. Keep moving bravely.
Amen.